Welcome to Accotink Unitarian Universalist Church live stream worship service. I am Jenn Carlson and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. I'm happy to be your worship leader today. Accotink UU Church is a welcoming and inclusive community that seeks to create a more just and compassionate world through our actions to bring about justice and by honoring the web of nature of which we are all a part. All are welcome here in this justice-seeking, earth-healing community of faith. You are welcome no matter whom you love, no matter your identity or heritage, no matter your beliefs or backgrounds, no matter your means or abilities, you are welcome here in this religious community. We also welcome the ancestors and descendants. We welcome the people who made each of us, the biological ancestors, spiritual ancestors, teachers, and guides. We welcome those who imagined and made our congregation possible. We welcome the ancestral people of this land and recall that our church, like all of Burke, rests on the unceded territory of the Manahoac tribe of the Great Sioux Nation. We seek healing with the people of this land whose bodies and spirits live on in their descendants, many who are members of the Monacan Indian Nation, the Patawomac tribe of Virginia, and the Piscataway Indian Nation. We honor the ancestors as we move toward healing so that all the descendants together shall one day know full justice. With this, let us welcome the longings and hopes of all the descendants that we might live for them today. I now invite Paulette, our worship associate for today, to continue our welcome.
Good morning. If you are new to Accotink and would like to talk more about this church, please be sure to reach out to me, our minister, Rev. William, or a member of the board. Contact information is posted on our website at www.accotinkuu.org. On our website, you can check the online order of service on the worship section of our web page. While you're on the website, be sure to check our events page for upcoming virtual gatherings and other news. On a personal note, I'd just like to say, for one reason or another, Stan and I have not been able to attend Sunday service, and I'm just so glad to be back in the fold with this community. I invite you now to close your other windows or apps and devices. Take a deep breath and center yourself for worship. This chalice lighting was written by John M. Higgins. Welcome to this place. This is a home where no revealed truths are promoted and no scripture or human being accepted as infallible. This is a place for searching for truth, but we are believers. We believe in intellectual freedom. We believe in justice. We believe in compassion and concern for each other and the whole world. We believe in commitment to those ideals, which make us caring and active in the struggles for human dignity. We are Unitarian Universalists.
Our call to worship today is a reading called Life is Always Unfinished Business by Richard S. Gilbert. In the midst of the whirling day, in the hectic rush of doing, in the frantic pace of life, pause here for a moment. Catch your breath. Relax your body. Loosen your grip on life. Consider that our lives are always unfinished business. Imagine that the picture of our being is never complete. Allow your life to be a work in progress. Do not hurry to mold the masterpiece. Do not rush to finish the picture. Do not be impatient to complete the drawing. From beckoning birth to dawning death, we are in process, and there is always more to be done. Do not let the incompleteness weigh on your spirit. Do not despair that imperfection marks your every day. Do not fear that we are all still in the making. Let us instead be grateful that the world is still to be created. Let us give thanks that we can be more than we are. Let us celebrate the power of the incomplete, for life is always unfinished business. For today's prayer, we are going to use a prayer by Marnie Harmony. I invite you now to enter into a spirit of prayer. We whose journeys are always beginning, we whose mission always awaits us, we whose visions are bent on loving, we gather together here. We gather as a community drawn together out of common need, each toting our own carpet bag of treasures and dreams. We gather together seeking meaning, yearning to understand life in all its dimensions, as it challenges and expands, as it burdens, as it consoles and heals. We gather together with questions, the kind of questions that provoke us to the path of action. We gather with hope, the kind of hope that pulses on through uncertainty. We gather with tenderness, the kind of tenderness that can only be born from knowing human capabilities as well as human imperfections. We gather wanting certainty and having none, but we are wakeful to possibilities as we seek discernment and gentle judgment. We gather then unbounded but close. We gather thirsting. We gather drawn to our source, our creator. Amen. Blessed be.
This reading is adapted from one written by Charles Magistro, and it's called "It's Not Easy Being a Unitarian Universalist." I'm amused by the view that it's easy to be Unitarian Universalist. It's as easy to be a Unitarian Universalist as it is to be persistent, courageous, and curious. It's as easy to be a Unitarian Universalist as it is to search the murky waters of life without sure charts to guide us, or any guarantee that we will find a safe port to put down anchor. It's as easy to be a Unitarian Universalist as it is to overcome the natural fear of the unknown and venture forth with nothing to sustain us, save our zest for living and hunger for new experience and knowledge. Our way in religion is not the way of ease. We are called to be sailors, for many worlds exist waiting to be discovered, and not the least of these worlds are within ourselves. It takes as much persistence, courage, and curiosity to look into our own depths, to come to terms with the twin mysteries of being alive and having to die, to see ourselves in new and larger ways without being dishonest about our limitations, as it did for explorers to sail thousands of miles into an unknown ocean until they found dry land.
It is good to have an end to journey toward, but it is the journey that matters in the end. Ernest Hemingway. I'm going to share a little of my story with you today. Some of you may know that I grew up as a military brat. My father graduated from the Air Force Academy at some point in his career, ended up in the Navy, and has finally retired from the U.S. Army. My parents divorced when I was 5, and my mother remarried a man who entered the Air Force. So between the 4 parents and the whims of the U.S. government, I attended 7 elementary schools, 2 middle schools, and 3 high schools by the time I graduated. I'm not going to say that I recommend that lifestyle, but by the time I attended my first high school, I had accepted and even enjoyed looking forward to my next adventure. On my first day at San Lorenzo High School in Northern California, I walked into the main office, and on the wall in front of me was a huge mural bearing the words, "Life is a journey, not a destination." I'm sure almost everyone on this call has heard that aphorism at one point or another. This memory of the wall was the first time I can remember actually contemplating that concept. I remember thinking, well, isn't that silly? If we don't have our next destination in mind, how will we ever get there? This is the response of a 13-year-old daughter of a navigator who had already moved to 11 different cities. My entire worldview was made up of destinations. I was obsessed by them. At that point, I was planning on attending the Air Force Academy, serving as an intel officer, and then straight into Republican politics. I know. Each step was planned, each sub-step on a checklist in my head and heart. Coming as I did from a family whose backbones were in the military, we hardly ever stressed over housing. Most of the time it was provided. My parents were promoted along a predictable timeline. I felt safe in that predictable system, even though I was uprooted every few months or years. Looking back at my 13-year-old self, I have to chuckle and give myself the grace now that I didn't know I needed then. Life seems pretty simple and straightforward when you have all of your steps planned and logged. But we all know that really isn't the case. What happens when plans change? What happens when you end up in a place you didn't expect to be? As you also might know, I didn't go to the federal academies. I declined my appointments to the Air Force Academy, West Point, and the Naval Academy in favor of a tiny military school in the middle of nowhere, Vermont. And that seemingly small choice changed almost everything. I changed. When I graduated from Norwich University, I realized that I wasn't the Alex P. Keaton Republican clone that I had thought I was. I was, in fact, pretty liberal. I was a theater person, a member of the Pegasus Players, which was a new and defining tenet of the person I am today. For the first time, I didn't have my next destination in mind. For the first time in my life, I had to search to find out what my new truth was. The first duty of every Starfleet officer is to the truth. It is the guiding principle upon which Starfleet is based. Jean-Luc Picard. I've watched a great deal of Star Trek in my life. It's been a grounding force for me. So when I find myself lost, I look to familiar places first to find comfort. This is safe, but it's not always the fuel we need to search for our truth. As UUs, we are lucky to have the freedom and encouragement to search for our own truth. Our fourth principle states a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. And I will admit that for years, I didn't really understand what that meant. I was still hanging on to that bit of 13-year-old me about destinations. So I thought that it was the truth and meaning that was the most important section of the fourth principle. And for the next part of my life, I was trying to locate myself in relation to the truth I thought I had to end up with. I've always felt drawn to earth-centered spirituality and the divine feminine, but that wasn't the truth I was supposed to end up at for so many years, and I didn't follow that path. I stayed in the church of my upbringing, becoming more agitated and more wounded by my association with it. But that was the truth of my childhood, and my extended family embraces it. So that means I just have to figure out how to get there with them, right? To get to that destination. I knew that I was supposed to work and go into politics, right? Cue me moving to DC. When I first got here, I was hired to work at the Institute of International Finance. I was hired in the Asia Economic Department. This was supposed to be my first job outside of college, stepping stone to my first campaign, right? Because that was the destination. Those first couple of years here were brutal for me. I lived with my friends or my dad, and eventually alone, and it didn't feel right. More to the point, I didn't feel right. I was miserable and lonely and probably depressed, and I didn't know why. I was still checking off my list. That list had seen me through moves, a total of 4 divorces. Just to clarify, that was my parents, not me, and many other upheavals. But it wasn't working, and I didn't know why. One night, a friend of mine took me to a play that had a talk back afterwards with the actors. You see, in my list making, there was no time for theater. For the first time since I had left Pegasus, I was in a room with artists again. But I wasn't an artist, was I? No, I'm supposed to be trying to get into politics, and well, actors and artists, they just aren't that, right? But for the first time in years, I felt right. Old paths were not working, and for the first time, a new path felt right. I needed to fuel this search. I needed to cultivate curiosity. I didn't know the words for this at that time in my life, and I did not know that curiosity could even be cultivated. Now, looking back as a parent, I can see this process more clearly. Children are curious creatures. Like the boy in Our Time for All Ages, they explore, question, and wonder, and by doing so, learn. From the moment of birth, and likely even before, humans are drawn to new things. When we are curious about something new, we want to explore it. And while exploring, we discover. By turning the light switch off and on, over and over again, the toddler is learning about cause and effect. By pouring water into a dozen different shaped containers and on the floor and over all their clothes, the 4-year-old is learning concepts of mass and volume. A child discovers the sweetness of chocolate, the bitterness of lemon, the heat of the radiator, and the cold of ice. If a child stays curious, they will continue to explore and discover. The 5-year-old finds tadpoles in a tiny pool of mud on the playground. This discovery gives them pleasure. When they experience the joy of discovery, they will want to repeat this exploration. The tadpoles grow legs. The child learns that tadpoles become frogs, and knowledge leads to confidence. Confidence increases a willingness to act on curiosity, to explore, discover, and learn. I needed to find this natural curiosity to fuel me, but how did I cultivate it? Lao Tzu once wrote, "A journey of 1,000 miles must begin with a single step." But what was that single step? For me, I began reading again. For background, my parents really didn't believe in babysitters. When I needed to be occupied when they were working or something, they would drop me off at the library and told me to start with A. This advice worked so well that I was entirely enveloped by Isaac Asimov for years. To get me started on my journey, I started reading again for fun. I didn't just read the books I knew I enjoyed. I branched out to read classics and nonfiction and genres that were new. Reading is one of the oldest ways humans have of passing knowledge on to each other. And it doesn't matter how we do it. There's my favorite way, through physical books, smelly and wonderful. There's while I was nursing my daughters, I fell in love with my Kindle app. It was so nice to be able to read and turn pages with one hand. As I've commuted in the DC area, and as I've driven all over the country, I've embraced audiobooks. Any of these methods of reading help us broaden our world and help us to imagine new ones. Thought for most of our population is grounded in language. When we learn new words and framing, we can better ground and explain new ideas and change old ways of thinking. In my reflection, the first step of a free and responsible search for truth was to read, to learn, to challenge, and to change. Where to next? What was my next step in cultivating curiosity? Get comfortable being uncomfortable. 20 years from now, you will be more disappointed by the things you didn't do than by the ones you did do. So throw off the bowlines and sail away from the safe harbor, catch the trade winds in your sails. Explore, dream, discover. Mark Twain. I'm not sure when or if I made a conscious decision to move away from the things I was comfortable with, but I did. I looked up every theater in the DC area, called and asked if they needed help, any way, some way for me to get involved. That's how I started my career as a stage manager. For the first time, I looked away from the destination I thought I was trying to get to and embraced the search. Now, after over 150 productions and having worked everywhere from the now sadly gone and turned into a CrossFit, 8th Street Playhouse, to the Kennedy Center, I can finally say that I am and have always been an artist. For the first time, I felt right. Another example of putting myself into an uncomfortable position was where I ended up growing was when I realized I didn't have a social group. I was a young professional. I worked 9 to 5 and then worked most evenings and weekends in the theater when I had a show on. I missed having a peer group. I really loved Capitals hockey though. So in 2001, with a few of my first paychecks in the bank, I became a Cap season ticket holder. Just one seat and I knew no one. But in true early 2000s fashion, I also started posting on the Caps message boards. Pretty soon I had met some like-minded Caps folk and we started meeting in person for happy hours and road trips. Now, some 20 years later, some of these same friends have been with me week after week as we've all dealt with the pandemic and our own isolation. We formed a group to play games together once a week, but apart in our own homes, like an introvert's dream. Lesson learned, however, that if I wanted to grow, I had to be uncomfortable and do something I loved, even if I started doing it all by myself. The people I needed to find were there, but I had to cultivate my own curiosity and search. It was just the same with music. I've never really been one for clubs, but I do love live music. In 2002, I fell in love with the Richmond band Carbon Leaf. So even though I mostly went by myself and felt really uncomfortable doing it, I went to their shows. At one performance on the steps of the Smithsonian, I introduced myself to their pretty amazing opening band, the Lloyd Dobler Effect. Because of my background in theater, I started working for LDE. When my schedule permitted, I went on the road with them as an unpaid sound engineer. It was a pretty spectacular year. And during that year, the universe put me in the same room as my husband 4 separate times in 4 separate states. Finally, after bumping into a young man while carrying congas on stage at the HF Festival, I was introduced to the man I would marry. Had I not cultivated curiosity and taken those first uncomfortable steps, I would not be here, and definitely not with my 2 amazing kiddos. My family is now pretty good friends with the members of Carbon Leaf, and we've built family rituals around their music. Every time I've made progress in my life, it has been when I have been curious about something new and tried it without knowing if I would fail or succeed. It was about forgetting the destination and focusing on the journey. It was when I embraced the other part of our 4th principle, the search. It was when I let myself search that I found my truth. I stopped going to the church of my youth. And when I finally allowed myself to ask, hey, you know what? Am I a pagan, perhaps? This was my first step that led me, being dragged kicking and screaming by Chris Fuller, to Accotink. I have to give credit where credit is due. You can't win against Christine when it's for your own good. And in the 6 years I've been part of this community, I have felt more fully me than I ever did in the church of my birth. But that first step was uncomfortable, difficult. It didn't fit the narrative I had so carefully cultivated for myself. How can we fuel our search for truth and meaning? How can we cultivate curiosity as a spiritual practice? We can read. We can get uncomfortable being uncomfortable and make that list of things we've always wanted to do and never had the courage to check them off. Interpersonally, we can consciously practice curiosity with the people in our life by doing one simple thing. In every conversation, think of questions to ask, not things to say. There's a reason you have 2 ears and 1 mouth. By listening more than you speak, curiosity is activated. When you're having a conversation, don't think about what you want to say next. Think about what you want to ask. It's hard. Trust me, it takes practice and patience, but starting with a learning mindset will help. When the other person makes a point or says something you don't understand, stop and ask them what they mean. Ask them to tell you more. Put your whole heart and mind into the conversation and into your curiosity. By having curiosity with people, you build strong relationships and fuel that continual search for truth and meaning. Spiritual practice takes effort. Being curious takes effort. Another way we can fuel our search is by making a list of things we want to learn and go do it. Education has never been as accessible as it is now to most of us. There are hundreds of hours of courses online that are free or low cost in almost any subject. We are surrounded by people in this very community that are teachers and lifelong learners. After my stroke in 2019, I realized it was high time I started learning Scottish Gaelic because, as Jean-Luc Picard says, live now. Make now the most precious time. Now will never come again. Start now. Think of 3 to 5 things that you want to learn. Set that list aside. And the next time you get bored, which is a word that we're not allowed to say in my house unless the kids want extra chores, before you turn on Netflix, pull out the list and pick a topic to learn. In summary, my lived experience has taught me that the destination isn't the most important part. I didn't arrive at any of the destinations I intended to when I started out. I'm a career stage manager. I've been at the Institute of International Institute for over 20 years, although now I've moved into IT rather than economics. I'm a member of Accotink's pagan group Sacred Wheel. I help people along their birthing journeys, and I have an amazing family that supports all of this. Curiosity is the fuel that powers our own personal journeys. Cultivate it. Read. Get uncomfortable being uncomfortable. We grow in places and ways that are uncomfortable. Listen and learn during our whole journey. The philosopher Spock put it thus: it is the lot of man to strive, no matter how content he is. We each have the capacity to cultivate curiosity in our lives. The journey doesn't end in a destination. It ends when we are no longer searching. I will leave you today with one more quote from my favorite source, Star Trek's Captain Picard. There is still so much to do, still so much to learn, Mr. LaForge. Engage. Blessed be. Though we extinguish our chalice flame, we carry within us what we kindled. The light of inspiration, warmth of compassion, the fire of commitment. May we bring these gifts into our lives and share them radiantly out in the world.
Now I invite you to join me in our community blessing with these words of David Bumbaugh. This church is dedicated to the proposition that behind all our differences and beneath all our diversity, there is a unity that makes us one and binds us forever together in spite of time, death, and the space between the stars. We pause now in silent witness to that unity.
I leave you with a benediction by Mark Mosher de Wolf. With what benediction shall I leave you? This in your life, may you know the holy meaning, the mystery that breaks it into every moment. May you live at peace with your world and at peace with yourself. And may the love of truth guide you in your everyday. Amen. Blessed be.